Deskillification, what do I mean by that? Well, so there's something called the division of labor, all right? This is Adam Smith's term, but Karl Marx would also use it to talk about political economy. What it means is that you break down the manufacturing of a product into its many component parts. That makes it more efficient, and it also means that the people producing the goods don't need to have particular skills. Historically, an artisan or a craftsman would create, let's say a boot. Right? Let's say a boot. He would create the sole, he would mold the upper, he would put in the laces, he would drill in the holes. He would make the shoes explicitly and very much to the order of the customer to match his or her feet exactly. Now, did they make great shoes? Oh, you better believe it. There were many master cobblers in America who produced the shoes made the whole thing themselves. They were artisans, right? And artisans ran workshops where they trained journeymen and apprentices who one day would become artisans themselves. The problem was, if one person made the entire shoe himself in his workshop, it was expensive, right? It was a lot of effort that was put into it. It was a lot of work. What happens in the 1840s is we see not really the industrialization of this process, but the division of labor involving this process. Now let's continue with our example of the boot. Typically, historically, what had happened is that artisans would train journeymen and apprentices to make boots as well, and once they had reached a competency, they would set up their own workshops where they would also produce boots to order for customers who wanted them. What begins to happen in the 1800s, and especially with the arrival of all these new unskilled immigrants, is the production of commodities like boots starts to get broken into a lot of different component parts. What do I mean by that? Well, whereas one person had constructed the whole boot himself before, now someone makes the sole, someone makes the upper, someone drills the hole, someone makes the laces, someone sews it all together. So like 5, 6, 7, 8 different people might now be involved in the production of one boot. What does this do? It makes it much faster. And it also makes the labor much cheaper because artisan, the cobbler, who used to make the boot himself, now he oversees a sweatshop, right? New York is filled with sweatshops. You know, New York, the real estate is expensive, right? But you can always find a cellar or a garret or a walk-up somewhere that you can put a whole bunch of people into one room to work together. Well, now, rather than overseeing apprentices and journeymen, the artisan oversees a room full of unskilled, typically immigrant laborers who do one part, right? This guy, he's in charge of making the sole. This guy, he's in charge of making the upper. This guy, he's in charge of sewing it together. None of these are tasks which require any skill. So they don't need the skill anymore. What happens is the old artisan journeyman apprentice system starts to break down. And these workshops now are just one foreman overseeing a bunch of unskilled workers who are doing different component parts to produce one finished good. The labor has been divided up among them. They don't need any particular skill. It can be done much more quickly. It can be done much more efficiently. Is the finished product as good as the masterfully crafted boot which had been made by the artisans in the past? No, probably not. But they were produced in much higher volume, and as a result, they were much cheaper, right? So as a result, manufacturing, we now see a great outpouring of products which are consumed by a national market in America that's interconnected by canals and railroads, and manufacturing in the cities, right, and in New England near the fast-running rivers near the fall lines, these people are producing manufacturing goods. They're all trading with one another. And in fact, with tariffs in place, American manufacturing is given a boost, and American trade is mostly intranational, meaning within the country, along the canals, along the railroads. And of course, the economic development of America continues apace. Women are involved in this as well, and particularly in what's called the putting out system. Now, again, this is about the division of labor. Imagine a tailor, right? Tailors in the past, they had made the entire article of clothing themselves, right? They were master craftsmen. They had apprentices and journeymen. Now that changes as well. What they do is they start making these goods by bringing it down to its component parts. The master craftsman, what he does is he cuts out the cloth, which will then be assembled, sewed together, have buttons and whatever fasteners put on it as necessary by unskilled laborers. A lot of times, the master craftsman would cut out the pieces of cloth that would be necessary to assemble into the finished product, the finished piece of clothing, drop a whole bag of cut off pieces off at a cellar, at a sweatshop, and all day long, the women in the sweatshop would work to sew together these pieces of clothes. It was unskilled work, and it was paid very meagerly. In any case, what we see here is that there is slowly starting to be a development of manufacturing in America that does rely upon cheap, often women, and often immigrant labor to produce these goods, which in the past had been produced entirely by one person. The division of labor now means there's only one person overseeing the process, as all of these unskilled laborers work in sweatshops to do the unskilled work necessary to create finished products in volume. This, more than technology, is the first step in industrialization. The division of labor, whereby most of the work is broken down into its component parts and done by unskilled laborers. It happens in America as well. The Second Great Awakening is another religious awakening spread by evangelical preachers who are also, much like in the First Great Awakening, interested in itinerant preaching outside, revivifying the religious spirit in America. And it is true. The revolutionary generation, despite what people might say today, was not particularly spiritual. It was not particularly inwardly directed. It was not very religious, right? The 1820s, 30s, and particularly 40s see a tremendous rebirth of evangelicalism in America. But this evangelicalism really does focus on the power of the individual, right? Actually, the First Great Awakening had as well. These preachers who were so talented that they could go out and preach to large crowds of gathered people at a revival. Whoever the best preachers were the ones who were rewarded with the largest crowds. Hence, if you were talented at it, you could become a great preacher. The fact of it, and a popular one as well, the fact of the matter is that that this idea of individualism was not just restricted to the religious sphere. Evangelicals, those who were making money from the market revolution, those people who owned the mills and the workshops which produced the goods which were flowing all across America and growing the economy, they became wealthier. They became more comfortable. Their wives did not have to work. Their wives, rather than going out and working in the fields or, God forbid, working in the factory, now they could dedicate their entire time to raising the children. This leads to a cult of domesticity where, at least amongst middle-class people who could afford it, right? Not everyone could afford for the wife to stay at home. But the middle-class people who could afford it started to imagine a world where the man's place was out in the world of business and commerce, and the woman's place was at home. This is called separate sphere ideology. Is one sphere more important than the other? No. The public sphere, where men work and do politics, is equally important to the private sphere, where women raise children as well. So, these women, these middle-class women who had now had more time to live and to more time to raise children, start dedicating themselves to religion more, and we do see a regrowth in evangelical belief. They also start dedicating themselves to causes like anti-slavery, causes like women's rights. Women's rights and anti-slavery are largely brought up and brought to a national level of political importance by these middle-class women who the market revolution has made their lives comfortable enough that they don't have to work and they can dedicate their time to raising children. and pursuing political causes. I mean, women, despite the fact that they didn't have the right to vote, were very important in spawning the anti-slavery movement and in spawning the women's rights movement, mostly through giving speeches and going on lectures and signing petitions. Nevertheless, the idea of anti-slavery or temperance, increasingly women are joining, and men as well, middle-class people, though, that's what, they're joining these groups which are trying to limit the amount of alcohol that people drink, that are trying to limit the spread of slavery, they're trying to give women more rights. Ultimately, this reform impulse is born in the hearts of middle-class homes as women who are put in charge of taking care of the home, of taking care of the domestic space, start to imagine the nation at large as a domestic space that also needs the guidance of women. So even though they're working from home, the truth of the matter is, the home can be politicized. In any case, this is also a effect of the Second Great Awakening. This evangelicalism that says that anybody who works hard enough can, anybody who renounces sins and embraces Christ can go into heaven, kind of has an analog in this idea that anybody who works hard enough, lives a life of sobriety and industry, can find success. This is the very bedrock of the ideas of individualism, meritocracy. People who work hard can get ahead. In any case, this is the mainstream of the Second Great Awakening, this middle-class evangelicalism that was particularly popular in places like upstate New York, where the market revolution had led to great profits for people who benefited from the growth of mills, from the growth of manufacturing, from the growth of canals, which connected this thriving, buzzing economy from the Ohio River Valley all the way westward to New York City. The Second Great Awakening, another important thing about it is that it did spawn some interesting movements in American history. Of course, there's the people who believed in free love, the spiritualists, the people who started to form communes like in Utica, New York, but probably most notable amongst the new religions to emerge during this time period was that of the Mormons, right? The Church of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith was from the same region as other people who were involved in the evangelical Second Great Awakening. He was also from upstate New York. It's just that his beliefs were even more novel than those who came before. So Mormonism is also part of the Second Great Awakening. In any case, what we've seen here then is that in the North, this newly interconnected market economy that brought together all the disparate parts of the North into one complex but integrated economic whole resulted in tremendous economic growth in America, right? It also kind of divided America between North and South. Now that the old Ohio country, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, are largely yoked by canals and the Great Lakes to the Northeast, the northern and the western part of the country start to develop separately and start to follow a different economic path than the South, who we'll get to in a minute. The North becomes a much more commercial region. Again, the vast majority of Northerners continue to farm, but now they are commercial farmers. They've switched from growing a diverse array of crops to concentrating on just one crop, which has marketable value and which they can grow efficiently, and they rely on the newly constituted infrastructure to bring them the things that they do not grow. What does this mean? Are they dependent upon other parts of the country for various goods which they require? Yes, absolutely. They no longer are self-sustaining. The idea of the yeoman farmer trumpeted by people like Thomas Jefferson, who vaunted the independence of American farmers who needed to rely upon no one else, that is now a thing of the past, at least in the North. Northern farmers depend on other parts of the country to deliver the goods that they do not produce. But the tremendous profits and efficiency to be realized by growing just one crop, which you're particularly good at growing, meant that you could be part of this large interconnected economy, grow the thing you're best at growing, let other people provide you with the manufactured goods and everything else that you would have historically grown or produced yourself. So now you are dependent upon this large market. You're dependent upon the market economy. Are you independent economically anymore? No. You're dependent upon other people. And some people started to fear this, right? They realized that America was much more interconnected. The market economy was, in fact, accompanied by a number of significant economic busts, right? 1817 and 1837, both of these years saw tremendous economic busts. And prior to the market revolution, if there had been a depression and, let's say the price of wheat, that would only affect one aspect of the, only one aspect of the economy. But now that everybody is connected, a glut in the prices of wheat means that the people who are growing wheat no longer have the money that they would need to buy other things from different parts of the economy, and that spreads the depression into those parts of the economy as well. So that is one of the downsides of an interconnected economy, that with everybody relying upon everybody else to provide them with the basic needs that they want to, live comfortable lives, means that they're all interconnected in a way that an economic bust in one part of the economy can no longer be isolated, and it spreads to other parts of the economy precisely because now the economy is so interconnected. But the other, maybe even more significant change in America is that now that Americans in the North, in the old Northwest, rely upon goods from other parts of the country to be delivered to them by canal or by railroad, they're no longer independent, right? They're now part of a modern, complex economy with many, many different moving parts. They are no longer yeoman farmers. They're parts of a larger market economy. And as might be expected, some Americans really resented this. They resented the loss of independence. They resented the fact that America's economy had grown, but had become so much more complex. And in fact, the second party system in America is, on one hand, the Whigs, who favor economic development, who favor the market revolution, who think that the independence that has been lost and the fact that, people are forced to manufacture things at very low cost, this is the cost of economic growth. That is largely the belief of the Whigs. But opposing them is the birth of another new party, the Democrats. And what the Democrats believe is that the market revolution is a dangerous thing, and the worst excesses of the market revolution need to be curbed, and America needs to find a way for farmers and other or average, ordinary citizens to become independent again.